From that point, what made you decide to go to graduate school?
So I was teaching and watching several things around me. So I learned that I was underprepared for teaching, as were many of the people that I worked with, although not all. I learned that big urban high schools, sort of the factory model school with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 kids, is not structured to allow teachers to care effectively for their students or to be accountable for their students, and that the likelihood that particularly marginalized kids would struggle and fall through the cracks was way too large. And I learned that school resources and funding were dramatically unequal. I mean, when I went to Camden, there were no books in the book room. There was almost nothing to work with in a school context. And that was in the days when the lawsuits were being brought in New Jersey. Robinson v. Cahill was the first lawsuit. There were 30 years of lawsuits before finally they put money into the urban districts in New Jersey back in 1998. So I was there at the beginning of that process when Camden was spending, half as much as Princeton and New Brunswick and some of the other affluent districts. So I was watching this and thinking, okay, I can do what I can do as a teacher to the best of my ability, and I worked hard at it and made a small contribution. But there are bigger things going on here that if we're going to really make schools a good place for all kids, we really need to tackle. And so I went back to graduate school with that in mind.
And where did you go to graduate school?
I went to Temple, where I had done my initial preparation in that intern program in the urban education division. I was actually snagged by a wonderful educator who was the chair of the urban education department, a guy named Bernard Watson, who had been a deputy superintendent in Philadelphia under Mark Shedd. He later became vice president of Temple and went on to later become president of a foundation. But he was an intense, brilliant, committed person who knew a lot about the policy and practice connections in urban education. And I went to visit him in his office. I said, I'm thinking of graduate school, and here's what I'd like to do. And by the time I left his office, he had gotten me a scholarship and had me enrolled. And he guided me in a wonderful way through my doctoral program, because he made me take the most rigorous courses that were available I took the entire statistics series. I took courses in economics and political science and every aspect of the social sciences that bears on education, plus of course courses in education, administration, systems theory, and pedagogy. So I got this incredibly well-rounded interdisciplinary education. I did my dissertation on school finance reform in Pennsylvania, but I looked at the New Jersey situation. And when I left there, I was really aiming for a policy research focus.
Okay, so you weren't thinking tenure track position at that point?
No, I didn't know from tenure track, actually. I didn't come from an academic family or grow up in an academic community, so it's like I was just kind of making my way along around the issues that I was passionate about.
Sure. There you met one of your best friends, Lonnie Mosley, and she says that within an hour of meeting you, she loved you. So much that she stalked you in admiration. This is also when you met somebody else you loved very much, your husband, Alan. Yeah. Tell us about your husband, Alan.
Oh, yeah. I should just have a shout out to Lonnie, too, because she is still my very best friend. And I love her dearly. She has kind of helped me raise my kids and everything else. Alan was working at a little law firm, a little public interest law firm in Philadelphia one summer, as I was. He was a law student at Penn in West Philly. I was an education student at Temple in North Philly. We met in Center City at this little nonprofit education law center. He was the law clerk for the summer. I was the research assistant for the summer. We were doing work on education justice issues. And he had the office next to mine. Actually worked in the library, and he came over to greet me the very first day. And he sort of stood in the doorway. We started talking, and about 2.5 hours later, he was still standing in the doorway, and we were still talking. And when he left, I called up my girlfriend and I said, "Okay, this is the one. I've met the person I'm going to marry."
Already that soon.
I knew it, yeah. And then, of course, when Lonnie came to pick me up for lunch one day, about a week later, she meets the two of us, and she's very psychic, and she looked at Alan and she looked at me and she said, "You two are going to get married."
She told me that too.
It's true. And we were so embarrassed because neither of us, we hadn't even gone on a date yet, you know, neither of us had admitted to the other one that we actually thought that might be true. So that was, you know, kind of typical Lonnie, just to kind of blurt it right out there. And sure enough, you know, he proposed to me a couple of weeks later. And
she said that she thought that moment you were not going to be friends with her ever again, but she knew that's when you lived up to your name, which was then Linda Darling, and so that's what the metaphor that she drew from that experience.
Yeah, well, we ended up getting married in her mother's house.
Oh yeah, that's what she said too. Tell us about your children.
Well, we have 3 wonderful children: Kia, Elena, and Sean. And Kia was born actually in Philadelphia when by that time I was working on a dissertation, so she was born when I was working on my dissertation. And we later moved to Washington where Elena and Sean were born, and they are magnificent people.
And from what I hear from your friends, you're magnificent parents.
Well, we love them a lot. We started our very first date. We started talking about how we would raise children, which probably was a sign, you know, that we kind of just went past everything and started talking about, you know, families and children, and yeah.
And what's your secret?
I don't know that we have a secret. We've bumbled through like everyone else. I mean, we're very devoted to the family, and we love them, and even when we screw up, you know, we still love them, and I think they know that.
That's great. So love, the common denominator. Yeah. What your daughter Kia admires most about you is that you have persevered in your work to bring equitable education to all children, and you do all of what you do with humility and grace. She says that you're one of a kind, yet far more complex than what many understand. What do you think she means by that?
I don't know. I'd like to go ask her. That's a good question. I don't know. You know, I have a lot of lives. I do work in a lot of areas. So I love working with kids and in classrooms and with people in schools. So I do a lot of work. You know, we have a little school that I helped to found in East Palo Alto, and I do work over there, and I work with districts around here. Because I so admire what educators do, and I love the work in the classroom with schools. But I also work, you know, with the governors and state superintendents, and I also work with the federal government. And so probably a lot of people I work with know one part of me, and maybe that's what she means.
She sees you.
Yeah, and we have a very rich family life, and I have some great friends, and we do wild and crazy things, and so, you know, there's a lot of facets to anyone. And
we're going to come back to wild and crazy for sure.
Okay. Oh dear.
What your other daughter Elena admires most about you is the extraordinary support you have given her over the years, especially during some very trying times. What was the very special moment when Elena was in college that you got to tell her, "I told you so"?
Oh,
what was that about?
I loved that moment. So Elena is a natural pedagogue. And Kia is a natural psychologist, and she just told me this week that she thinks she'll go back and get her PhD in psychology. And she's always the one who would, you know, sort of understand people's motivations and figure out how they operated. Very insightful. But Elena was always a natural pedagogue. So when she was in kindergarten, she would come home and say, "I think this teacher is a very good teacher because she really knows how to connect what the children know to what she's trying to teach them." Or, you know, she would say, "I'm very worried about what this teacher did because, she did so-and-so and it really embarrassed the children and I don't think they're going to respond. It was unbelievable. So all the way through school, she was the one who really both was always engaged in teaching. She took her younger brother on as her pupil. She started reading to him when he was a week old and, kind of raised him up. But she also was analyzing teaching. So when you talk about reflective practitioner, she was a reflective practitioner when she was like 5 years old. I kept saying, you would be a great teacher, you would be a great teacher. And finally, when she was an adolescent, she said, would you just stop talking about that? I don't want to go into teaching. I'm not going into teaching. I have no interest in teaching. Shut up, Mom. So I said, okay. So I tried. I'm not very good at that. But, most of adolescents, you try to zipper your mouth and not be, overbearing. So I tried to lay off of it. She gets to college and she takes her first education course and she called me up and she said, don't get excited, Mom. But I just took an education course and I think I might have to major in education. And I tried to be cool, but I was like, oh yeah. I was on the other end of the phone just like so excited. I said, oh, that's very nice, dear. I'm very happy because I didn't want to blow it by being too excited. So, and she is now, as is Kia, a wonderful teacher.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
You got your I told you so moment back.
I tried not to say I told you so. I don't think I said it. I don't know. What did she say?
She said you said it.
Oh, I
but
did?
that's okay. But you were in your right to be able to say that. Your youngest child, your son Sean, says you two have a lot in common. A shared sense of humor, shared passions to improve the world, shared quirks, and the like. He talks of a time you spent with him while he was studying in Japan, and he calls you his rain mom. What is that about?
Well, Sean has a very mathematical brain, and so I have called him Rain Man from the movie with Dustin Hoffman because he was always doing the mathematical stuff. So Sean's the kind of person you're driving along with him, and he'll say, and you see a sign that says the next town is 13 miles away, and he'll say, oh, at the current speed that we're going at 13 miles away, we should be there in exactly 5.4 minutes or whatever it is, and he'll calculate the whole thing, and he's usually right, So I just started teasing him, and I called him Rain Man, and then one time we were together, and I have that same kind of brain, numbers stick in my brain, and I started, ticking off because I was answering somebody's questions. I ticked off my social security number and Alan's social security number and all the kids and my credit card number and my, this, that, and the other thing without, I, just knew them by heart. And he's like, I can't believe that you're just saying all these numbers by heart. So he started calling me Rain Mom. So that's our name for each other, Rain Man and Rain Mom.
Your friend Lonnie also remembers a time that your authority trumped the Grim Reapers. Do you remember what that's about?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is her version of it. She was very sick. In fact, she and her husband Cordell were here for New Year's Eve, and we were having a great New Year's Eve, but then she started to she woke up later in excruciating pain. It was interesting because they don't sleep here all the time, but it was New Year's Eve. We said, we got a guest bedroom, why don't you just stay? And they did, and she woke up in excruciating pain. It turned out that she was actually in septic shock. I mean, it was really serious. And we rushed her to Stanford Hospital, which is why it was so interesting that they were here.
Sure.
And we could just go across the campus and get her into the emergency ward. And I stayed with her, and I have to say they weren't taking adequate care of her, so I was very aggressive because they took her for an x-ray, and she was so much in pain, she was doubled over, she couldn't lay still, so they brought her back without having taken the x-ray. Mm-hmm. So I was like, oh no, you will take her back, and you will do this, and I'll go with you, and blah, blah. So we finally she ended up in emergency surgery, et cetera, et cetera. They put her in a hospital bed the next day, and we were just, taking turns sitting. And at one point she said to me, oh, I think I'm going to die. I think it's just time. I'm just going to go to the other side. And I said, oh no, we will not be doing that. And she says that the way I said it was just like sort of this voice of, that's not going to happen. And so as a consequence, in her view, in her version, she decided she would just stay here and get better.
Yeah. She calls you from that experience, the ultimate adult, the ultimate authority on things.
I think she was in a fog of, medicine, but in any event, I'm glad she's still here.
Yeah. Arthur Wise, who worked at the Rand Corporation in Washington, D.C., remembers meeting you soon after you graduated from Temple, a young and exceptional Linda, from what he said. And he recruited you to work at Rand with him. What did you spend nearly a decade doing at Rand?
Well, first I was working with Arthur, who was a wonderful mentor, and he was developing something called the Center for the Study of the Teaching Profession. And we actually began to develop, we were looking at all these federal policies and policy influences, and it became clear that there are lots of policies trying to control the work of teachers, and we were trying to study that. And it was clear that those policies typically didn't work very well. And in fact, sometimes they made it harder for good teachers to do what they knew how to do on behalf of individual kids, because they were often very prescriptive and standardizing. And as we were really analyzing this and trying to think about what would be a better response than the policies we're studying, we realized that there's a whole line of policy that could enable teachers to be sufficiently knowledgeable, sufficiently skilled, sufficiently professional, that you could trust them to make good decisions about curriculum, about the design of schools on behalf of their kids. And that professional policy would really be, at the end of the day, much more powerful for the education of children than all of the efforts to control the work of teachers. In fact, Lee Shulman, whom I know you're also talking to, talked around that time about the remote control of teaching. And that would work if children were standardized and you could do everything in a sort of routine fashion. But children are not standardized. They don't learn in the same way at the same pace. And so the problems of practice are always going to be non-routine, which means you have to build a profession. So we started that work and spent about a decade working on the issues of professionalizing teaching. How would you change preparation and selection and evaluation and the organization of the profession, et cetera, et cetera. Ultimately, I was the director of the education program at Rand, and we sort of began to take that work into a variety of areas, also including the equity agenda that was becoming clearer and clearer as a part of the problem. At that time, we had Jeannie Oakes and Milbury McLaughlin and Paul Hill and Art Wise and Tom Glenn, and it was quite an amazing group of people at Rand taking up those issues.
And David Lyon, former vice
David Lyon was my boss.
former
wonderful
vice
boss.
president.
Yeah.
He said that when he worked with you, you had the uncanny talent for raising money for all of this work as well. You had and still have the gravitas, along with the most agreeable personality, to be taken very seriously by your audiences about the research that you were doing. I also talked to Milbury McLaughlin. He met you as well at Rand and adds that you are an institution builder, as you have created centers of work and thought wherever you have been, then and since. Arthur Wise remembers how you juggled the roles of wife, mother, and academic, and once had to take your daughter Kia on a flight with you to work. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
And Kia asked Art if he knew what a mother was. Do you remember what her response was? He said he didn't. He said, "No, Kia, what is a mother?" Do you remember what she said?
I remember this, but I can't remember exactly what she said.
She said, "A mother is a person who takes care of you when the babysitter cannot."
That's right. That's why I selectively forgot that one. That one actually wounded me, but it was, it was true. She.
Everybody with whom I spoke, though, said that you were just a dynamic in terms of that complexity and how you manage everything that you do for education for the profession as a whole, but also for your family at the same time, how you can balance being a working mother, especially through those formative years when your own children were young.
Yeah. Well, when they were little, I made a point always to be home for dinner and bedtime. So I didn't do a lot of the lengthy travel that I do now, except if I did, I would take
Take them with
take
you.
him with me.